The story kicks off with Chamber, and two girls instantly tell him he's starting to weigh them down. They'd been sitting there waiting on him for ages, praying he'd finally pick up some real useful skills. But since it wasn't like that, he yanked them down with all his strength. They flashed him a fake smile and swore they'd stand beside him through this dawn. The two girls rushed up to Jane, clinging to him like they needed him to breathe, and told him Chamber was about to bail from the party, so Jane frowned and demanded, "Why are you doing this?" And that plus the excuse Martha cooked up. For adventurers, its simple skills run the whole show. Everyone gets one the moment they turn 15, and that single power basically writes the rest of their life. But once his Chamber skill leveled up, it hit like a dud, just a useless upgrade. She then said, compared to him, my fire magic is way ahead and Naru's got holy magic too. Then she shrugged and added, as for Jane, he's the hero. That's why Chamber probably felt completely out of place at this party. Right then, worry hit Jane, and she demanded to know where Chamber was heading. But the two girls didn't care a bit about him, and they even told Jane to stop sulking over that boy and wipe the whole thing from her mind. Still, the hero couldn't shake his worry and kept wondering how his comrade was holding up. Meanwhile, the other Chamber wasn't just standing there, it was getting battered as it fought off an onslaught. A couple of monsters prowled out in the wild, and even then he couldn't land a single hit on them yet. He slowly realized this wasn't just tough, it was way harder than it ever looked. Usually when he stepped into the party, he didn't fight for style. He soaked every hit, grabbed the enemy's attention, and kept all the aggro on him while everyone else tore them down. Then he jerked his head back, forcing that thought out, because the dawn was already gone. He was gone for good, no spot left for him in that party. And with the weight of everything landing on his shoulders, he sprinted straight at the monsters. The monster swung its club at him, and he snapped his sword up to block the hit. He kept whispering to himself that he had to stay calm. He stayed cool for a beat, then he burst forward and carved the enemy down in one swift slice. But the chaos wasn't finished. One more attacker lunged at him from behind, and he snapped into position to block that strike too. Then he swung in one swift motion and chopped the monster's head clean off. After he wiped out his opponents, he sucked in deep breaths and thought, I can actually do this alone. Right out of nowhere, a fresh monster lunged in and slammed straight into his face. He finally understood. This was the very first one he hadn't managed to wipe out completely. He strained to push himself back up, but the monster slammed him down and left him with zero time to recover. And clamped her hand on his face. The monster was already poised to end him for good. And in that split second, he remembered those two girls like it just happened. Always sneering down at him, calling him nothing but a useless burden. He gripped his sword tight, but those voices kept clawing at his mind, and kept snapping at them to shut up, using that rage He dug deep for strength and swung his sword, driving the monster back with every step. It was over and rage burned in his chest, because he'd been one bad moment away from dying, all just to scrape by against a weak monster. He stayed pinned to the ground, gulping air because his body refused to move. And as he stared up at the sky, a sickening thought hit him. Was he really about to die just like this? His vision started to smear and fade at the edges. Then boom, a notification flashed in front of him. He'd leveled up and his health and mana got completely restored. He had zero clue what was happening, then suddenly, he felt it. He could move his body again. And the scars on his face had fully vanished, like they never even happened. Dozens of questions slammed into his brain. What the hell was that level-up voice he just heard? Why was a glowing plate floating in midair right in front of him? And what in the world did HP and MP even mean? He had zero clue what was happening. But he just knew asterisk those numbers weren't random, they matched his abilities, like they were measuring exactly what he could do. And just like that, it clicked, this had to be his skill and he'd leveled up at last. He stared at the window hovering in front of him, and when he saw his stats jump, his heart raced. Did that mean his physical power had leveled up too? He finally clicked everything into place. Every time he leveled up, his HP and MP got slammed back to full, and that's why his wounds healed on the spot. And on top of that, his offense, defense, and speed all surged at once, so with this skill. The thought that he could keep getting stronger lit a fire under him, and when the truth hit, he exploded with excitement, because it turned out his skill didn't fall flat, it hit like it meant business. Ever since then, he's been ripping through monsters left and right, never letting up. And he could feel the level up hit him, like power flooding straight into his bones. He felt weightless now, and swinging his sword suddenly felt like nothing. And now that his MP had jumped, he could finally cast magic he couldn't touch before, and it all added up to something huge. He finally crushed the orc that had been messing with him earlier, and it was almost effortless. He leveled up again, landing right on level 4, and it basically proved his theory. Keep wiping out monsters and your level keeps climbing, or at least that's what it looked like. But later, right as he crashed in his brand new base, rumble, he finally could. He couldn't wrap his head around it, his levels stopped climbing and he had no clue why. He'd been battling monsters nonstop for ages, but his level just wouldn't. He was stuck, so he grilled his brain for why it suddenly stopped rising, but no clear answer ever showed up. He was locked in, determined to get stronger, and once that thought hit, he started pushing forward like his life depended on it, and with that thought in his mind, he crashed into bed for the night, lights out. The very next day, he burst into the Adventure Guild to hunt down whatever juicy quest might be waiting for him. But somehow, all of them still felt bland and forgettable. So he leaned over to Nyako at the front desk, begged her to point him toward a great quest, and straight up complimented her cat ears so hard she could barely resist smiling. But when she added, loud and clear, that she was actually a noble tiger, it only crushed her pride and sent the offense skyrocketing. She snapped at him, reminding him that quests follow a first-come, first-served rule. And honestly, he should have known it by now after months of grinding in the rumble. But then, right as it happened, uproar erupted inside the guild. And the woman was dragged out of her party and thrown into exile. Her comrade was screaming that her skill was worthless and that they were done with her, like she was suddenly no longer needed. Staring at that chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling it was exactly what he'd lived through with his own party, when they called him a burden and threw him out. Her comrades couldn't wait to see how someone as useless as her would finally fall apart, so they ditched her and walked off. The girl lunged to stop them, but it didn't change a thing. And there she stood, completely alone, emotions crashing down, wondering were they really right about her. Chamber stepped up to her and poured out every ounce of empathy he could, like he truly knew exactly what she was going through. Then he leaned in and told her he knew a better place for her, and turns out. And with that, he practically invited her to crash at his place. The moment they heard the news, every single person in the guild went completely stunned. And even that girl was crumbling from pure embarrassment, while he stood there just as clueless, because in his mind, he absolutely didn't mean it like that. Her comrades erupted in laughter because she'd somehow found someone to take care of her that fast. And she warned Chamber that the next moment would prove her skill was unbeatable. Then the divine message cut in. He couldn't stop himself, he just had to know what that skill would do. Before they even got out the door, the women leaned in and mocked them, saying the two of them were somehow a perfect match for their dead, dull energy. Later, the two of them slid into a noisy tavern and sank into their seats. Then he demanded ale for them both, but she looked anything but at ease. And right there he told her he'd just been exiled too, so whenever disaster strikes, he swears ale is the one bright thing that keeps him standing. He didn't push her at all. He promised that if she didn't want a drink, he'd down both himself. When he heard her chuckle and say, yeah, she clinked her drink right back with him. Then he stepped up, introduced himself to her, and told her he was out here adventuring solo too, no team, just him. The girl did the same, stepped up, and introduced herself as Ale, the D-ranked venture. Chamber then said he was technically a C rank, but since he was going solo, he felt more like a G rank right now. So when she heard that, panic hit her like a truck, and she blurted out that she was actually below even an E rank, while he stayed calm and tried to soothe her. She then snapped that even as a priestess, her hands could only summon the weak little lesser heal. And the moment that truth hit, tears burst out as she convinced herself she was nothing but useless. Chamber got exactly what she meant, because deep down he was just as useless as she was. All of a sudden, Ale snapped into this strange new behavior and blurted that Chamber was only 30 points away from his next level up. Stop right there after you deliver that message, just stop. She snapped back to her senses and instantly lost it, freaking out hard. She kept blurting out apologies because sometimes when her skill kicks in, she forgets to think before she speaks. She cringed with embarrassment, snapped curse after curse at her useless skill, and meanwhile he had zero clue what was even happening to her. Then it hit him, she kept talking about leveling up and experience points, and suddenly everything clicked into place. He finally clocked what her power really was. And he snatched her up fast, blurted that he really, desperately needed her. At dawn, Martha kicked yet another party member out, cold, ruthless, and merciless, because he was still way too weak, even with that useful skill in hand. And he refused to back down, reaching for his sword until she struck first, blasting an explosion that detonated right behind him. She warned him, next time I won't play nice. And the moment she said it, the guy bolted, like his life depended on it. Naru was soaking up every second in the back, but Jane didn't act like them at all. And he said they were being a little too brutal to each other. The girls snapped that they needed way better people for the dawn. As Jane stared at the chaos, she couldn't stop thinking 3 of her party were already cast out. He could see it clearly. Martha and Nauru had real talent, the kind that made them feel like they were on top of the world, and it had him wondering if skills could actually reshape a person that hard. As Dawn's status in the party climbed higher and higher, this creeping feeling of danger wouldn't let him breathe. Because when he thought back on the days he used to love hanging around with Chamber, something just didn't add up. He couldn't shake the thought, so that's why everything feels different now. He couldn't even wrap his head around it. Dawn had zero room for him and it felt unreal. And he just had to find out what the heck was he doing right now. Later, Chamber and Ale pushed deeper into their journey, refusing to slow down for a second. As he battled that monster head-on, she slipped into place behind him and covered his back. He tore through the monsters and wiped them all out. And he thanked her for the help, because it turned out the two exiles had already decided to team up and run the trial together. After what felt like forever, he finally teamed up on a quest again, because for too long he'd been grinding it out alone. Now still, as he kept cutting the monster down, he could feel it, his power was surging higher, and he knew exactly why. His level-up skill was doing it. Once he finished helping everyone, Ale stared at him in pure disbelief, realizing just how powerful he truly was, and then she praised him to the skies. While he was buzzing with joy that he finally got to shine in battle, he couldn't stop grinning as a girl praised him. That level-up skill was basically a life raft. Every time he racked up experience points by stomping monsters, it shot his power higher and kept him alive. As for Ale, her skill was Divine Revelation, and man, it got a little complicated fast. Divine Revelations spilled the truth to everyone standing nearby. And earlier in the tavern, she told him exactly how close he was to the next level, and it hit him like a game-changing heads-up. From that clue, he realized something huge. Every goblin he wiped out would pay him back with a clean 3 experience points. And each time he levels up, the XP he needs for the next level shoots higher. So yeah, back in the present, he figured his goblins were finally done, at least the ones he just wiped out. He's finally ready to level up now. Then out of nowhere, Ale snapped, called him out and yanked his hand. He got hit with pure surprise and blurted, "What are you doing?" She shot back that his arm was bleeding, pointing out the injury like it was the biggest problem in the room. She stepped in and offered to heal him herself with her healing magic. Right when she was about to go for it, his phone buzzed, and he just hit a new level. It was the final proof his math had been right all along. And he felt a surge of pride for himself. Then Ale screamed, completely stunned as he saw that his arms. Her arm injury healed on its own, she didn't even lift a finger. He didn't freak out at all, turns out it was just a side effect of leveling up. Until he remembered this was his very first time leveling in front of someone else, and then reality hit. He was gonna have to explain everything fast. Later that night, as they built a campfire, he leaned in and poured out every last detail of his skill to her. After he crushes monsters, he scoops up experience points, and that power surge is exactly what lets him level up and jack up his stats. She couldn't believe a skill like that even existed. And when he actually agreed with her, she was stunned. Jokes aside, she admitted she was jealous of him, because her own ability was totally useless for adventuring. While the conversation was still hot, he leaned in and demanded to know why she chose to become an adventurer. And she shot back that she wanted revenge with her whole soul. He flinched when she said it, like the words hit him out of nowhere. And she leaned in and told him the whole thing started back when she was still just a kid. She was the second daughter in a family of 4, with a sister 7 years older who pitched in at home, while her parents, both merchants, were usually out of town, leaving her to stay with their acquaintances. One ordinary day, she waved her family goodbye and paced on edge, waiting for their return. They never returned because during their journey, thieves jumped them and the attackers killed them. After losing her family, she was shoved into an orphanage, shut the door on the world, and vanished from everyone's sight, because all she could think about was one brutal question: why did her innocent, kind family have to suffer? Time kept chipping away at her kindness until hatred finally stained her heart. That's why she dreamed of becoming an adventurer, because one day she'd finally strike back and avenge her family. Chamber froze with shock, and she instantly knew he had to be stunned after everything she just told him. Then with a smile lighting up her face, she leaned in and told him that all of it was over, gone for good. She finally understood this. With her whole kind family wiped out, revenge wasn't going to be the one thing that kept her alive forever. And she was certain those villains had turned into official targets already, like they'd been getting thrashed by karma and suffering ever since. So her only goal was to become an amazing adventurer, until she suddenly got pulled back in and brought. Heard someone tell her straight up, with how frail she was, this dream was never happening. Chamber flat out refused to go along with that. With a dazzling grin, he declared that the two of them would team up and become incredible adventurers together. She was left completely stunned. After dinner wrapped up, Ale just couldn't take her eyes off him. And then she leaned in and asked, "So tell me, what's your story and why'd you decide to become an adventurer?" He got all jittery and asked, "Do we really have to talk about this?" And she shot back that it was only logical he share too because she'd already brought it up. He admitted she was right, then laid out the real reason he decided to become an adventurer in the first place. Cut to a flashback, back when he was little. One day he watched Jane slice through a fighter in a brutal sword battle. Everyone gasped when a 10-year-old wiped out an adult adventurer. Yeah, he was low rank, but that still made them stare, and they all started calling him a genius. So Chamber kept hot on his heels, hounding him with a challenge to a sword fight. But after 33 fights, he still couldn't land even one single hit on that guy. Jane snapped at him to quit already. She said he didn't have the talent and some things effort alone can't fix. Chamber even admitted she might be right, but he still refused to throw in the towel. He just wouldn't, not yet. And he screamed that he couldn't stop now, he had to keep pushing forward. He only lived by one rule: never quit, no matter what anyone throws at him. Jane stared, stunned by just how driven he was, and then, no lie, she was genuinely impressed and said, "And not giving up, that's not just stubbornness, that's a real talent all on its own." Ever since that day, the two of them clicked as friends, and Chamber swore he'd become the world's greatest adventurer, so great he'd even outshine Jane. Back in the present, he admitted his reason wasn't some grand plan at all, it was pure impulsive instinct. Ale actually dug his story, and he couldn't help wondering if this is what real rivalry feels like, because when she said that, he silently hoped their relationship would turn into the same kind of fiery competition. Meanwhile, at Jane's party, someone else got booted out, and he stormed out of the room, seething with frustration. Those two girls didn't even blink, they just shrugged him off and called him useless to his face. Right then, Jane burst in and he pressed them for how many exiles there, been, and you could tell the man was really trying. Then the girls erupted in laughter and shot back that he wasn't even close to their standards. She flat out said that no matter how hard you try without talent, you're never going to make up the difference. Jane then shot back that not a single soul could ever take him down with a sword. He believed it wasn't just talent that made things work, it was his own grind, because in that chamber he could finally see the truth. Sometimes it's never talent alone. And no matter how hard he tried, he and the other two just couldn't click on this topic. He declared, "Right now Akatsuki has fallen apart." The moment it hit, both of them froze, stunned, and started grilling every detail. Why would he risk everything when Akatsuki was this close to A rank, and even S rank was basically within arm's reach? And they were bragging that they were the best party ever. Jane shot back that it could be true about skills, but for him it still wasn't enough. Then they pressed him about whether he'd picked out a new partner, and he said he could just team up with Chamber, leaving both of them absolutely stunned. But first, he needed to hit the reset button, alone, so he could start over on his own. And just like that, he walked off, leaving them with a brand new drive to become the best adventurers, starting from scratch too. Cut back to the chamber, right as he was holed up in a tavern. Ale crept up behind him and ripped the breath straight out of his chest. She was downing drinks again, pushing him to take just one more. And then boom, her skill kicked on out of nowhere. And she told him straight up he needed 60 more experience points to level up. When she finally snapped back to reality, he couldn't help thinking her skills had been saving him again and again. He started figuring out how much grind he'd need to snag 60 more experience points, then paused, because once again he was about to call them out. And demanded he drink with her. He caved, nodded yes, and was actually. I was honestly shocked by how much she loved to drink. Then, right when he said that, she suddenly went completely quiet. He went silent and then broke down, tears pouring as he cried. He panicked, suddenly terrified he'd said something wrong, and rushed to tell her he never meant it badly. Then she choked up and apologized for crying like that. And she laughed, saying it was exactly that. Hanging out with him and drinking felt insanely fun. For ages, she'd been a total weight on the party, but after that quest, when she started drinking with him, it hit her like a spark. She finally felt like a real adventurer. Chamber just let out a low chuckle and told her straight up. It was her who pulled him up when he crashed into rock bottom after being cast out, so yeah, he had to thank her. Meanwhile, she had already crashed into sleep. And he just grinned, staring right at her like he knew exactly what he was doing. Later, the two of them grabbed their courage and plunged right back into the adventure. And he just couldn't believe it. After all that she drank the other day, she was still absolutely buzzing with energy. Right then, he spotted a bunch of goblins lurking in the woods. He snatched his sword in a flash, raising it high and ready to tear into those monsters. Just as he started tearing them down, fresh ones kept pouring in from behind. But that didn't even slow him down. He kept hammering forward with his sword, driving the fight straight on while. Ale could handle herself just fine. With that, the two of them slammed their foot down and kept pushing forward. After they wipe out every monster, they slam on the brakes for a quick second, just long enough to catch their breath. And Ale was still reeling from what they'd just survived, because that was a whole swarm of monsters, while Chamber only grinned, relieved they made it out. They held it together, even though it was only the two of them. And just as he processed everything, a message popped up saying he'd leveled up. He froze in shock, realizing they'd wiped out that many enemies. Then he spotted a strange icon sitting on the veil, and his mind immediately raced. What the heck was happening? He got a message that finally taught him the party's formation. He couldn't believe it. And he just froze there, completely lost. He'd never heard of anything like it in his life. And when he finally checked the description, it laid out the exact members he could team up with to form his party. And Ale was sitting right at the very top of that list. An arrow sat beside her name, and the moment he clicked it, a confirmation window burst onto the screen. He asked her if she wanted to join his party. He still didn't fully get it, because technically the two of them were already in the same party. So he clenched his resolve and hit that confirm button. Then he stopped and realized, no, he couldn't make this call by himself. He called out to her, then his nerves took over as he blurted that he wanted to team up. Would she do it? He was. Nerves tore through him so hard he couldn't even hold a proper eye contact. But the moment he locked eyes with her, she just froze, staring back with pure confused disbelief. She told her that they'd already formed the team, and he shot back that she was 100% right. What he really meant was committing, officially teaming up and moving forward with it. Before he could finish a single word, she blurted out yes on the spot, and he just stared, stunned. Then she reminded him of the promise he made. They'd become incredible adventurers together. And that's why she finally threw her doubts aside and went all in, ready to officially team up with him. He smiled at the news, then they didn't waste a second. Straight ahead forward they went. With a ruthless click on the confirmation button, he added her to his party. He stared at it all like, okay, so what's the point? Because nothing at all seemed to budge, and if it really had a whole feature for this, it had to mean something. Ale suddenly snapped, called them out, and urged them to push forward, now that they were officially in a party. He nodded along with her, and with sunset still hanging off in the distance, he made up his mind. He was heading straight for the new forest. The moment they plunged into the forest, monsters of every kind came roaring out, and while Chamber tore into them, Ale kept him standing with her healing magic. Now that they were finally a proper pair, he could feel their moves syncing up, tight, fast, and perfectly. After mowing down a whole wave of monsters, he sprinted to scoop up every last magic stone they dropped. They could snag some real cash if they hauled it back to the guild. Then right out of nowhere, the level-up voice blasted through the air, and this time, even through the noise, Ale could hear it too, and that instantly left both of them dead confused. Turns out she was the one who leveled up, and her HP and MP got fully restored. She had zero clue what was tearing through her body, or why a voice in her head suddenly started talking, while Chamber stood there, utterly stunned, watching her level up just like he did. He started to get it. When he threw a party with someone, their members leveled up too, and now he couldn't stop wondering if that was the real punch behind the party formation feature. He tried to check her stats super fast, but she looked at him like, wait, what are you even talking about? Out then her stat window suddenly blasted open in front of her, shocking her all over again while he tore through her stats. He leaned in and told her the truth. She didn't just think she improved, she had actually leveled up. She couldn't wrap her head around it and blurted out whether this was all coming from his skills. He nodded like, yeah, that's it, then broke it down for her, straight up explaining what stats are and why they keep growing every time the level climbs. All fired up, she leaned in and asked, so that means I really got stronger? And he nodded, yep, that's exactly how it works. She was overflowing with joy and launched into a celebration, until she spotted something even bigger waiting just beyond it. She got a message telling her she could finally unleash the light arrow now. And her excitement skyrocketed, because back then she could only sling healing magic, but now she could unleash attack magic too, and Chamber was over the moon for her. Now that she finally got her attack magic, they wasted zero time, tested it on the spot right away. So she zeroed in on the tree right ahead of her. She raised her wand and fired off a delight arrow that lit the air, clapping his shot into the tree dead on. The arrow smashed a hole through the tree, and Chamber was absolutely stunned. Ale was practically buzzing with pure excitement. She still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that she'd actually used attack magic. But right then he caught sight of a squad of enemies hiding in the grass, and he snapped quickly into a warning to her. Turns out, a whole horde of goblins had popped up right behind that tree. He knew trouble was everywhere, so he shouted for everyone to bolt from there before it swallowed them whole. Just as the goblins were slamming down right behind her. But with so many of them piling in, he couldn't help wondering, did they swarm just because the noise hit, or was this place their turf? The two of them sprinted for their lives as the goblins kept hammering after them, closing in every second. They were closing in from everywhere, every single direction at once. And somehow, the two of them tore through every monster that stepped into their path. But even then, wave after wave of them kept barreling straight at them. One goblin suddenly caught up to Vale and snatched her bag right out of her hands. Chamber barked at her to dump her stuff fast. She hauled the bag behind her and tossed it without a second thought. Every single goblin instantly snapped their focus to that bag. And as they all lost focus from the loot he hurled into the chaos, he did the same. Then the two of them pounced on the opening and struck while everyone was distracted. Burst straight out of the forest, no hesitation. They finally burst out of the forest, then skidded to a stop to catch their breath. They realized the goblins had stopped hunting them the moment they slipped past the woods. So they turned around, stormed back to the rumble, and raced to the Adventure Guild to lay out every single detail. When they finally stumbled into the guild, they laid the whole story on the receptionist's desk, and her eyes went wide when she heard some mess like that had happened in the Noi forest. Then she spotted another woman lurking by the stairs. and she demanded that Chamber follow that lady and rush upstairs with her. The lady briskly escorted him upstairs to a room, and he burst through the door. A mysterious man showed up out of nowhere, then immediately apologized to him for interrupting him so suddenly. But there was one thing burning in him that he had to tell right then. Totally thrown off, Chamber snapped at him, asking if he was really just waiting for him, and he leaned in and told him, "I've got a request, I'd like to talk to you." Before anything else, he stepped forward and introduced himself as the guild manager. Manager Suranui heard that, and even then, Chambers couldn't wrap his head around why someone like him would ever come asking. The manager leaned in and told him the hero party Dawn was one rank away. And since Chamber was in it too, he wanted to grill him about what was going on with them. Chamber clenched his fist, spit out that he was done with that party, and then snapped that their rank was only like that back when he was still in it. Then the manager changed the topic on the spot, admitting he'd heard those fresh performances of his and that they really impressed him. He told him to calm down, no need to get soaked in stress, because he only wanted his help with an investigation request. Then he leaned in and told him exactly where to go into the Forest of New, the place he had to investigate. From what he just told us moments ago, that forest was crawling with goblins, and the manager basically demanded he dig up why they were there in the first place. He even told him to run the investigation in daylight, because goblins hit peak brutality at night, so when the sun's up there are far fewer of them. The guild couldn't shake the feeling that a king goblin was lurking deep in that forest. So the manager hauled him aside and warned him if he ever bumped into the Goblin King, he'd better bolt at once, because that monster was pure power. Chamber quickly realized that no big deal request was actually a death trap, but the manager waved him off again, swearing it was nothing, just a survey he had to fill out. Later, he and Ale slipped back into the forest, and Ale could instantly tell something was weighing on him, like he couldn't shake his worry. So she fired back, "What are you thinking?" And he admitted this mission was deadly, and that he was genuinely scared for her too, especially after what they'd already seen. That force wasn't normal at all, but then her temper flared and she snapped, asking if he really thought she couldn't be trusted. She reminded him they were at a party now, so whatever chaos hit, she'd stay right by his side. He shut the argument down for good, and Ale couldn't wait to dive back into their investigation. Right then, a huge goblin loomed right in front of him. And what shocked him even harder was the fact it wasn't just any goblin, it was a goblin swordsman. It was huge and brutally stronger than any normal goblin, and everyone knew it moved with a crew of regular ones like a little mini-boss lurking in the group. They both dove behind a bush, and as he spilled every detail to her, the moment kept getting more intense. She stared, stunned by how deep his knowledge of these monsters ran, then blurted out, "Have you ever fought one yourself?" To which he shot back that he hadn't, then admitted he truly believed that with their current strength, they could handle it, so the two of them burst out of hiding and stood ready to smash the goblins. Hail struck first, ripping through the air with a blazing light arrow, and she snapped her strike straight into the goblin swordsman's eye. But that still wasn't enough. Chamber had already seen this coming, so he lunged right after it, closed the distance, and swung his sword into the monster. With one brutal swing, he chopped the Gotland swordsman's head clean off. With the leader knocked out, the regular goblins instantly lost their nerve and started panicking. Chamber and Ale seized the moment, using their confusion like a smokescreen, and kept hammering their attack. They fought back hard, and somehow they wiped every single one of them out. And Ale rushed to bandage his wounds, begging him not to overdo it, because this was only an investigation, nothing more. Chamber got what she meant, but he pushed for extra experience points anyway, because if they ever crossed paths with the Dalton King, leveling up could be the difference between living and getting wiped out. Since the day wouldn't bring a huge horde, he figured one slip-up, one chance sighting would turn everything into a nightmare, because calling backup would be way more trouble than it's worth, so he wanted to be ready for anything, and that's exactly why Ale nodded, leveled up, and went straight for the Godland King. They pushed deeper into the forest, mowing down every regular goblin that dared block their path. Then finally they stumbled on a campsite, and goblin tracks surrounded the whole place. It looked totally ransacked, and they couldn't shake the fear that some adventurers got ambushed right here. Right then, Chamber's mind snapped. There was one last detail the guild manager had warned him about. A C-rank party vanished deep in News Forest, and I told him to chase down the mystery too if he ever got the chance. When he realized the missing persons were tied to this mess, he couldn't shake the thought that the other adventurers had just dumped their trouble on his shoulders. Just like that, he'll spot something lying on the ground. And the moment she grabbed it, she spotted Adelina's earring the moment she looked. She de-led her old party until that very day when she was the one who got exiled by the guild itself. As her crew was busy throwing together a camp, the two of them suddenly realized, somewhere in the chaos, a whole horde of goblins must have hit them. Ale pushed to go deeper into the forest, grabbed his hand, and apologized for pulling him into this, because she knew it was insanely risky, but she couldn't let it go. Chambers just smirked and said, "I knew you'd say that." He nodded and jumped in to help her track down Adeline, then followed the Gotland's trail step by step, hungry to see where it would lead. On their way, he peered past the bushes, and there it was, a hand jutting out as soon as they stepped in close to inspect it. They gaped in horror at the piles of goblin corpses scattered around, stunned by what could have done it. Then they spotted a sharp blue trail that vanished deeper into the forest and ended at a cave. Blood stained the cave walls and there wasn't a single ray of light inside, so both of them froze, uneasy as hell. Still, Chamber snatched the lid and surged ahead. Then he blasted light magic, forging a blazing ball of glow that lit up everything around him. Ale was blown away all over again, staring at his spells like they were impossible miracles. He insisted that even if goblins were lurking in that cave right now, they shouldn't swing at anyone, because everyone knew they caved under light. And then he shouted in, asking if anyone was inside. Then a voice cut through the air, grilling him on who he even was, turns out. Adelina and her entire crew crammed into that cave, scrambling to stay hidden. And they looked totally wrecked. Adele sprinted up to her and demanded, "Are you okay?" She jumped in, offering to heal her, but Adelina just couldn't wrap her head around why the two of them were even there. But Ale cut her off and told her to drop it for now, then slammed her with his healing magic. After she'd healed all three of them, Adelina leaned in and demanded to know why she was saving the very people who had kicked her out in such brutal fashion. She just smiled sweetly and shrugged it off, like it truly didn't matter to her at all. She turned into an adventurer to help people, and she was doing it so naturally that all three of them just stood there, completely stunned and speechless. Adelina let out a soft laugh, amazed at how genuinely kind he was, and swore she'd always stay thankful for that. Ale didn't want to come off as all high and mighty, so she shot a quick apology to her. Adelina swore that once they escaped, she'd buy everyone a drink, so they snapped into action and bolted out of the forest. But right then, one of her men's eyes snapped onto something strange. Right outside the cave, a goblin mage stood shoulder to shoulder with a few plain goblins, all guarding the entrance. Even though it was a low-level cave creature, it still caused pure trouble, because it could sling attack magic, and Adelina pointed out the brutal truth. None of them had any ranged attacks. They should sneak in quietly unspotted, but before she could even finish her sentence, Ale snapped a light arrow and he struck once and the goblin mage went down hard instantly, leaving all three of them utterly frozen, because it was their first time ever seeing her unleash attack magic. Chamber steered the weaker ones to safety, while Ale kept firing cover, then Adelina and her whole group just couldn't wrap their heads around what they were seeing. They mowed down every last goblin like it was nothing, no sweat, no struggle. Right then, both of them jumped a level. Chamber hit level 7, while Ale shot up to level 6. The two of them lit up with joy and burst into dancing, and the rest just stared in shock, stunned by what they were seeing. They stared at his eyes. Never had they seen Ale grin that bright, and that's when Adelina finally understood. The chamber didn't just affect Ale, it reshaped him. And honestly, she felt this huge wave of relief the moment she saw it. Chamber then whipped around and told everyone to follow him, because he alone knew the way out of the forest. One of the men spotted even more goblins lurking nearby, and just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, he finally snapped. So he yanked out his axe and vowed this would be his final revenge, until the moment he went to strike them. A mysterious stranger with stealthy, unstoppable steps slipped right in. He sliced through the goblins, and then the adventurers, so fast they were wiped out in an instant, leaving everyone staring in stunned silence. From beneath that hood, the shadow-swathed fighter wiped out the goblins, and scattered bolts lay there on the ground too. He's dead, bleeding out from that wound. Yet not a single one of them has the slightest clue who he even is or why any of this is happening. Adeline's comrades urged them to bolt, because it didn't look safe to stay there, and Adeline just snapped at him to stop whining like a baby. She didn't want a full-on brawl, but the hooded man gripped his sword like he meant it, so it didn't look like anyone was walking away. They had no choice now but to team up, lock eyes, and figure out how to blast their way out of there. She ordered Ale to hit them from the rear, and right as the call went out, Chamber stepped up to crash the front lines. Finally, she and her comrade Ricardo pounced the moment the opening appeared, while Chamber tried to steady his nerves, telling himself he'd leveled up and was stronger than ever. And with that, all four of them snapped into battle mode, gripping their nerve and taking their spots for the fight. Hale kicked things off by firing a glowing light arrow, but the enemy swerved out of the way with zero effort, so Chamber snapped into action, rushed in, and swung his sword straight at him. Still, he slipped out of the attack again, pure lightning-fast agility saving him. The hooded figure snapped back and slashed with his sword. Chamber somehow managed to block it, but his opponent's strikes came like lightning, so fast Chamber knew he couldn't keep the defense up for long. While Ricardo kept him distracted, he yanked his quick dash skill into action and blasted forward from behind to hit his opponent. He managed to land the hit, but it still didn't slice through him. And he realized the hood was hiding armor right there on his body all along. But it was already over. someone with a sword steadied Ricardo for a desperate final move. Ricardo yanked at his hood, fighting to uncover exactly who this mystery guy really was. And it turned out that monster was a black goblin. Watching the darkness swallow everything, Chamber couldn't even tell if he was dealing with a real goblin at all, until it suddenly lunged at him, and he barely dodged as it slashed across his face. Bloob surged into his eyes, blinding him mid-breath, while the goblin charged in, ready to land the final strike and end him for good. Right when everything calmed down, a glowing arrow slammed into the goblin's face. Hale snatched him out of death at the very last second. Even with that arrow sunk into its face, the goblin didn't feel a thing. Then it snapped all its focus straight onto her. The goblin came charging straight for her, and the chamber's warning blared, telling her to sprint before it caught her. But before she could even process any of it, the goblin shoved itself right into her face. Right then, Adelina snapped into action. She threw herself in front of the blow and parried the attack with her sword. But it still wasn't enough. She took another hit and blood poured as she kept bleeding. Then she blurted out that she'd finally paid back every last debt she owed him. And right after that, Ale stepped in, ready to heal her wounds on the spot. She snapped her back before it even started. No time for that, because the black goblin was still charging at them, and she ordered her to look out for herself before anyone else. But before she could even blink, the goblin was already on her, closing in like it was about to finish her. Right behind him, Chamber burst in and slashed at him with his sword. No matter what he tried, he couldn't cut him. His blade just bounced back and left him barely bruised, like he'd been punching a rock. The goblin snapped right back to its feet and slammed its kick into the Chambers with brutal force. It blasted him backward, slamming him into the tree like a cannon hit. Hale's stomach dropped with worry for him, while Adelina snapped back to her feet and sprinted straight for the goblin. She lunged in with her sword, aiming to cut him down. And the goblin shrugged it off, blocking the attack without breaking a sweat, even so. But she refused to stop, plowed forward, drove her step into one of his eyes, and the goblins erupted in screams of raw, unbearable agony. She let out a bright laugh at the goblin, because she finally uncovered the one part of him that wasn't all steel. It was soft, but before she could even blink, the goblin swung his sword and closed the distance in an instant, pinning her with a sickening shock. Ale snapped at her why she was acting so recklessly, and she fired back that this was her proud debut as the party leader, so she couldn't bolt when her comrades were dropping right in front of her. But Ale wasn't like her at all. She tossed her out of the party, yet still kept stepping in for everyone with her healing magic. Even though they weren't on the same team anymore, she clung to her last breath and drove him to hurry, run. All those black goblins swarmed in and sliced her clean in half right there, staring Ale in the face. Watching her get so shocked she couldn't even get words out, she crumpled to her knees. Chamber shakily pushed himself upright, and the moment he understood, this was Madalna's one shot at life or death. Now that the goblin's eyes locked onto Ale, his left side hung totally exposed, so even though he couldn't slash it clean, he could still line up his strike and go for the head. So he launched himself into the air and swung with everything he had to smash its head. But before he could even blink, his sword snapped clean in half and the goblin had clawed a brutal slice right across his shoulder. Right then he spotted it, green flames licking across the Gotland sword. Then the goblin clamped a hand on his neck and yanked him off the ground, hoisting him into the air. Chamber couldn't even wrap his head around it. How the heck was that goblin this strong? Even so, he was convinced the massive leveling grind had made him stronger than ever. He clocked it instantly. This enemy wasn't just strong, it was on a whole other level, already wiping out every last member of Adelina's team, and the sick certainty hit him hard. If he didn't stop it, he'd be next. Then he spotted Ale behind the monster, still sprawled on the floor, sobbing like her heart was breaking. He finally got it. If he goes down right now, Il dies too. Left alone after the team cast him out, he found her, and before either of them could hesitate, she agreed to form a party with him. No deep history, no guarantees, just trust. And that's exactly why he swore to protect her no matter what. And then he slammed his hand onto the goblin's face and blasted it with a light spell straight into its eyes. The goblin got blinded by the flash, stumbled as he clawed at his eyes, and before he could recover, the chamber surged closer. Vey strode in and demanded she get back up. The goblin couldn't see a single thing, so he spun and slashed with his sword in random, blind swings. As they tore out of the forest, the two of them booked it for their lives. They come charging back to the rumble, and finally burst through the doors of the Adventurer Guild. Seeing just how badly they'd both been beaten down, Nako stepped in, took one look, and realized he was bleeding like crazy. She snapped for help on the spot, but Chambers cut her off and insisted they had to report everything to Surinwei first. Right after he said that, Surinwei stormed downstairs and told him, "We'll talk about this later." First, they had to rush in and treat his wounds. After he finished getting treated, Sarini swept both of them into a room and brought them face to face with another man. Dingle, Guild Master of Rumble, stepped up and told everyone to calm down, because he was about to lay out the whole story. He swore the black goblin they'd just stumbled on in the forest wasn't just roaming around. It had to be blessed by some evil god. There was a goddess named me, the only god on this continent who hands out powers, but he said that only held true for humans. Just like humans had their own god, every other race had one too, and yep, the monsters had theirs as well. People called them evil gods, the kind humans refused to worship no matter what. He was convinced the black goblin they ran into wasn't just some enemy. It was a chosen servant blessed by the monster god, Azadahaka, and that divine mark let him wield powers that matched their own skills. Once Chamber heard that, it finally clicked. Now he understood exactly why that goblin was so blisteringly fast and nearly impossible to break. Dingel went on to say it wasn't some enemy they could have even dealt with at their level to begin with. Serenity even apologized for tossing him out there before she knew everything, yet he never imagined it would spiral like this. The guild had already started calling in backup from other guilds over the King Goblin, and they decided to leave the Black Goblin to them too. So he promised him the guild would take over from here, and told him to shut down this request for now. Meanwhile, Chamber slumped there, convinced he'd blown the mission, still staring at the fact that he'd believed he'd gotten stronger. He was still powerless, and his skills weren't even close to enough. Then he glanced at Ale, still shaking with terror, and worry hit him hard, because she couldn't lift a finger as the people who used to be her comrades stood before her and died, and the truth was brutal. Admitting he'd failed stung like fire, but he knew deep down there was nothing left he could do at this moment. Then out of nowhere, Al turned to him and blurted out an apology. It blindsided him and total confusion hit hard. She was certain that if she hadn't pushed for the investigation to keep going, none of this nightmare would have ever unfolded. If only Adelina and the others had stayed tucked away in that cave, they would have lived. But she was the one who couldn't stop pushing forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was all her fault, until Chamber looked her dead in the eye and told her none of it was true and that it wasn't on her at all. Then she snapped that Adelina only got hurt because she was shielding her, and in the end, it was all because Adelina was useless. When she said that, the whole room went dead silent for one wild second. Since every single person who tried to shield her ended up getting crushed, she snapped that she never wanted to see it happen again. But then Chamber leaned in and told her, if you really believe that about yourself, then I'm right there with you. He got absolutely crushed in that fight, couldn't land a single move or make a thing happen. Ale snapped that it wasn't even true, he'd saved her a countless number of times, and then he fired back, saying he felt the exact same way too. He reminded her that if it weren't for her light arrow blasting that black goblin, he wouldn't be standing there alive right now. In the end, it wasn't just fate, she saved him too. Adventurers were always tiptoeing through a death trap, one wrong step away from dying at any moment. That's why they had each other's backs, because that's what a party is for. And right after that, he told them straight up. He wanted to be the kind of adventurer who'd stake his life on the line just so he could protect his friends. Hale was completely stunned when he heard that. And he knew the truth. At his level right now, he couldn't save a single soul, so he clenched his resolve and pushed to get stronger. He truly fully believed that the two of them, together, could get stronger for real. At that exact moment, it hit her, his level-up skill. And he flashed her a grin without taking his eyes off her. He was certain that once he leveled up, he'd get strong enough to crush that black goblin. Ale also admitted that quitting felt unbearable to her. She vowed to get stronger, so nobody else would ever have to gamble their life just to keep her safe. And the moment he saw her clench her fist, he instantly understood exactly what she was feeling. You already know what they were about to say. And Chamber slammed his decision down, promising they'd finally close the investigation request. Sarenmi and Dingle were totally thrown when he answered like that. He pushed himself to his feet and demanded they hand him a brand new quest. Sarenmi leaned in and grilled him about what kind of mission he wanted. And he flat out told them he was hunting that black goblin and bringing it down. And it hit even harder, pure shock. Dingle just exploded into laughter, and pure shock hit him like a truck. He couldn't stop showing off that raw passion, and he fired back, telling them to follow him. He fished out a handful of keys and started clicking them in his hands like he was about to spring a plan. He brushed it off, even as Serenu warned him those keys were insanely important, then just waved it off and demanded he follow him. When Chamber grilled him about where they were headed, he just smirked and promised, "We're going to a place that's going to be amazing." They slipped down into the basement. While Dingle wrestled with the keys, Suranui barged in and told him straight up that this spot was the guild's storage room. Dingle's hands were fumbling the keys like a nightmare, and Suranu rushed in to help him out. But rage flared in him, and he smashed the lock with zero hesitation. He tore into the storage hunting for what he needed, and Suranui cut in to remind him there were tons of priceless treasures hidden in there. But once again, he shrugged him off and plunged straight into the hunt, until he found exactly what he was looking for. As he burst out of the dust, Chamber leaned in asking if he was all right, then Dingle shoved a sword into his hands. He stared in disbelief as a golden greatsword materialized right in front of him. Dingle leaned in and told him the name Thunderblade's Thor, which left him even more stunned. The instant his hand closed around that sword, he felt its brutal weight crush into his bones. And he couldn't even get it to budge. He couldn't make sense of that weight, same size as his old greatsword, but it felt like it had 10 times the mass shoved into the blade. He thought, if I'm still me after leveling up, I'd bet I would have dropped it already. Dingle could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, and he told him this blade had belonged to his comrade, an S-ranked adventurer so strong they feared him, until one day in the middle of battle that legend got cut down and died. Even when he knew death was waiting, he still chose to fling himself into danger to guard others, because risking his life felt right to him while being protected didn't. He was an absolute idiot, charging a whole dragon alone just to buy Dingle and his comrades enough time to get away. Chamber leaned in and demanded to know why he was handing him such a legendary, life-changing sword. And Dingel suddenly remembered those words he'd just spoken. He was chasing the dream of becoming an adventurer who'd gamble his own life just to protect his friends. And he admitted straight up that he looked shockingly similar to that guy. He ruffled his head and told him to stop stressing over the little stuff, because this wasn't some handout, this was the price up front, paid in advance for the reward. Confused, Chamber shot him a question. What reward did he mean? He said, Dingle himself wants me, right now. And then he laid out the Black Goblin subjugation quest like it was coming straight from the top. Later on, Chamber and Ale kicked through a dead, deserted wasteland, the silence screaming with every step. She noticed his heavy breaths and asked, "Are you okay?" Yeah, because earlier he totally admitted this new sword was freaking heavy. He couldn't stop thinking about how Dingle basically ordered him to master it, and the truth hit him. This thing was heavy in more ways than one. Still, he didn't just sit there. He pushed to get stronger because he was determined to finally master that sword. Until then, he already knew the truth. He couldn't beat the Black Goblins. Ale nodded along too, and that's exactly why they pushed this far. Toward the hunting ground of tyranny, he pushed himself to sharpen every single skill. The second he stepped in, 3 goblin swordsmen were waiting right in his face. He nodded along exactly like the intel had promised. They kicked off the attack and Ale wasted no time. He launched a blazing light arrow straight at one of the goblins, while every last one of them got yanked off their focus. Chamber tiptoed in and swung down, cleaving a goblin in one vicious slash. One swing was all it took. Suddenly he felt the sword's brutal weight, and he knew that before leveling up he'd barely keep his grip because the heavier it is, the harder it lands. The blade's true power was about to ignite right now. Now he replayed every word Dingle told him. This blade wasn't just for show, it only truly awakened when he landed strike after strike. Thor is a blade that crackles with lightning, and every fast swing it makes unleashes a storm. And right when the thunder surges into it, the thing suddenly feels way lighter, which cranked the user's speed even higher. And that's exactly how it went. Chamber snapped a perfect strike in the blink of an eye and carved down another gauntlet swordsman with one brutal slash. The more he swung it, the more everything started to feel like it could break. With every zap that stacked up in the storage, the lightning kept swelling, pumping even more raw power into it. With one brutal slice, he dropped the last goblin swordsman, so tell me, did he just clear all 3? Il sprinted in his direction, closing the distance fast, and he can't believe he just wiped out an entire crew of Gotland swordsmen all by himself. Then he shrugs and says it wasn't magic at all. It was this brand new sword, still crackling like it's alive. Then bam, a massive boulder crashes down from the sky and slams right onto them. He lunged in, snatched Ale in a flash, and dove out of danger. At first glance it screamed just a rock. Then he stared at it up close, and Chamber snapped that it was finally time they showed up. And turns out it wasn't just anyone, it was the Dublin leader. Ale leaned in and asked if this was the plan for this round, and he nodded. Yeah, this is it. Normally, one goblin swordsman drags a bunch of regular goblins along, but when multiple goblin swordsmen show up together, it screams one thing. Some bigger boss is calling the shots above them. He'd ordered Nyako to gather the intel and pinpoint the spot, and now it was confirmed their prediction had been dead on. The Galvan leaders were brutal bosses, and he figured wiping them out would shove them straight into a mountain of experience points, exactly what they needed to level up as fast as possible. So the two of them tightened their resolve and readied themselves to take on the Gotland leader. Ale still couldn't believe how massive it was, but Chamber snapped, "Keep it busy, give me the opening to close in." She kicked things off by firing a glowing light arrow which smashed straight into the leader's eye at the exact moment he lifted his sword to strike. The monster slammed its fist into the ground, and now they've got a chance to fall back. Chamber shoved a step back and then bolted straight at it without hesitation. He couldn't deliver the killing blow, so all he managed was a savage slash that cracked the skull mask the goblin leader wore. Then it lunged in and swung its fist straight at him. But he dodged it at the last second, hit the ground, and immediately dropped into survival mode, figuring out his next move. That monster's massive bulk and brutal attack variety kept him pinned back, so he couldn't even get close. Since that was the way it went, he broke the routine, focused his will, and surged forward with his sword blazing. It was the ultimate strike Dingle had warned him about. Once the sword finally hit max charge with crackling lightning, it screamed through the air and slammed that energy straight into the enemy chamber. As he slammed his sword through the air, with one brutal strike, every ounce of energy detonated at once, and slammed straight into the goblin leader. The goblin leader was totally wrecked, drunk out of his mind. It crashed to the ground, utterly defeated. Chamber's eyes widened in pure disbelief at just how viciously powerful that attack was. It turned out to be way bigger than you ever expected. Then boom, his sword suddenly felt heavy again and it all clicked. Dingle had warned him that after the lightning was fully unleashed, the blade would snap right back to its original form. He realized that if he ever used that attack recklessly, it could get him killed too. Just then, boom, both of them slammed a level up message, and in the same instant they both shot up to level 8. It blew them both away. Ale had leveled up twice in one shot, and he instantly realized the experience points from that goblin leader were way better than he ever imagined. They cracked open their stats window and checked the new upgrades they'd scored. He was shocked to find out he'd only gotten a weaker healing skill, but with his magic power running low, he could pull it off just once, and it still couldn't truly bring him back to full health. But then he glanced at Ale, and she looked way too hyped as she burst out, shouting that she'd finally figured it out. The move she mastered was called Light Javelin. And yeah, it was a dream spell every priest feared and wished for, so brutal it crushed even Light Arrow. She burst with pure joy, feeling power surge through her, and swore she could now pack way more punch in every battle. When he heard her say that, Chamber figured she was busting her ass to get stronger and finally catch up to everyone else, so he fired back with a plan. Let's head back to Rumble for a bit. They already cleared the boss in that zone, so grinding on scraps wasn't worth the time, and he insisted they shouldn't rush into it from the very start. And because things have been tense non-stop lately, they finally deserved a breather, so Ale didn't hesitate to agree. When he finally stormed back to the Adventure Guild, the whole place went silent, because he pulled out a goblin leader like it was nothing. He hauled out the magic stone he won by crushing that boss and demanded his reward right on the spot. But Naka was still reeling, jaw on the floor, and demanded to know how he crushed a Galvan leader with nothing but his rank. He just smirked and said it all came down to their hard work. She kept working, but it wasn't the answer she wanted, and the two of them finally slid into a spot together and shared a drink. And Ale admitted it had been ages since they last took a drink. Rank leaned in, buzzing with curiosity, because they'd already wiped out the goblin leader, so what was next? He just flashed a confident grin and told her to trust him, saying he already had a solid lead on their next move. He told her to breathe, kick back, and savor that drink for now. The very next day, the two of them stormed back to the exact same spot in the hunting field. She demanded to know why they'd returned, even though they already crushed the goblin leader, and he shot back that was the whole reason they came back. Like he said earlier, goblins usually roll in packs, but their leaders never team up, because every single one rules its own pack like a lone boss. That's why goblin leaders never stayed calm for long. They were always locked in brutal territorial fights. In short, they'd finally wiped out the area's boss, so everything shifted from there. Then it would roll in and start carving out more territory. Right then, Chamber snapped his head around. Something behind him had just made a sound. When he spun around, a goblin leader was right there, plus a whole mob of goblins pressing in behind him. Just like he'd predicted, then out of nowhere it all hit at once. Right when he thought he was alone, another leader slipped in, right behind him like a shadow with a purpose. He wasn't even that shocked they'd all chosen this spot, because right then, he saw the opening to wipe them out without waiting another second. The two of them unleashed every move they had, tore through both goblin leaders and their packs and wiped them all out. After the fight, they stood there like champions, and boom, both the Lancer Chamber and Ale leveled up, reaching level 12. Back in the city, things were about to explode. A full-blown uproar erupted everywhere. And then it hit hard. Those goblins had slipped into the city and taken it over. Sarah Nui sat in his office when a burst of noise crashed outside his door, and he immediately started wondering what the heck was happening. Meanwhile, Dingle barely caught a thing. Right then, NACO burst into the office and blurted out his report too. The goblins tore through the streets, turning everything into chaos for the whole group, leaving both of them reeling in pure shock. Dingle shoved for every detail and she snapped out the truth. Even with D-ranked adventurers fighting back, a goblin leader was still among the chaos, making everything worse. While Sir and me couldn't wrap our heads around one thing. Why would goblins even rampage through the city? Dingle pushed her, asking if no higher-ranked adventurers were nearby. Because there was no way lowly D-rank fools could even stand against a Baldwin leader, and she shot back that it wasn't that simple. Ever since that Black Goblin fiasco, all the top-tier adventurers bylaid on fresh missions, leaving only a handful of decent-ranked fighters behind. And Dingle was sure they'd bolted the second they realized they were about to get stuck with that nightmare. Because seasoned adventurers usually had to handle nose trouble, it left the town packed with nothing but clueless rookies. Disappointment slammed into him, and he snapped at Sir Anu to sprint to the warehouse and grab every weapon he could get his hands on. Saronmi pressed him, asking if he was truly serious about this, and Dingle cut in fast. There wasn't time to bicker, not with an emergency like this. Stepping outside, he caught adventurers clashing head-on with a swarm of goblins. One girl tore into the goblin leader with a blazing fireball attack, but it didn't budge a single bit, and he was right about to slam his fist into her face when, suddenly, a blazing javelin slammed into the monster's back like a lightning strike. It was Ale and Chamber, and they finally tore through back into town. He couldn't believe his eyes. How were goblins creeping around inside the city? And he also clocked the goblin leader's back injury, and it screamed that no adventurer ever did that. So yeah, he got it, this had to be handled, and he grabbed Ale and told her to unleash that brand new technique of hers. She launched her enchant spell and supercharged it with raw power. He cranked his sword strikes with pure light power. Chamber slammed forward at them like a bullet with intent. And first, he ripped through the two goblin swordsmen standing right there. There, every adventurer froze in disbelief, because he crushed those swordsmen in what felt like seconds. Meanwhile, Dingle watched himself as he pulled out the tiny gauntlets, charging his sword with lightning fast, clean, and deadly efficient. He couldn't believe it. Somehow, he was already starting to get the hang of that sword, and it genuinely impressed him. As the chamber locked horns with the goblin leader head-on, he lunged in and hacked off its leg with, which sent the monster tumbling to the ground. Then he exploded upward into the air and unleashed every last drop of lightning stored in the sword. He drove his blade through the goblin leader, and that was the end of it, leaving every spectator stunned as he crushed that monster with zero effort. What? They all started cheering him like he just saved the world. And Dingle even praised him, saying he crushed it. Chamber's whole mood lit up the second he heard that. When Sir Indy came back, battered but grinning through sheer struggle, hammer bigger than him in both hands, and demanded, "What do I do with this thing now?" Later, they all piled into Dingle's office, like something big was about to go down. In the office, Chamber laid out every detail of his level-up skill, and the moment he heard what it could do, he went wide-eyed, blurting out whether he'd really powered up that much in such a short time. Chamber nodded, and the guild master immediately pressed him, asking why he'd bring up that skill right now. With how huge his value was, Chamber knew that once word spread, troublemakers would come crawling in, scenting opportunity. Chamber just told them straight up. He spilled the truth because he trusted them. And when Dingle pressed him, "Why do you trust them this much?" he shot back that it wasn't proof, just a gut feeling screaming at him, leaving both Dingle and Sir Anu totally stunned, like their words got knocked clean out of their mouths. He burst into laughter, loving how brutally honest he was, and even admitting that his read on people wasn't half as bad as he thought. And he told them that the moment he looked at both of them, thoughts like that wouldn't stop crashing into his head. And just like that, the two of them suddenly got a little shy. Dingle shelved everything else for a second and leaned in, asking what he really thought about that goblin leader he'd just blasted on the streets. Goblins are usually skittish by nature, and they almost never dare to leave their home turf because once they stake a claim, they guard it like their life depends on it. Chamber nodded along and admitted he was just as curious, especially about the goblin leader's scars, like they didn't just happen by accident. Dingle was sure there had to be a real reason behind them. This had never happened before, and he couldn't shake the feeling the black goblin was behind it all, because it was the only new lead he could think of. Saron barged into the chamber and demanded, had anyone seen that black goblin attacking others too? So he straight up confirmed it, meaning the black goblin probably wasn't accepted by the other goblins at all, or it was just a total rampaging maniac, smashing anything that crossed its path. That goblin boss probably got driven out, its territory got stolen by the black goblins, so now it slipped into the city looking for a new foothold. If that really was the case, Chamber couldn't help but wonder, were those goblins trying to slip away, or were they truly aiming straight for the town? Serenity insisted it was still just a theory, but she made it sound like it could actually happen. Dingle also knew they were running out of time. The black goblin's influence was already crawling outward, and the moment he heard that. After that, Chamber and Ailes snapped in unison that this case had to be settled, right now. Later, the two of them shoved their stuff into their bags and got ready to sprint out the door. Nyako was freaking out for them and insisted they hold their ground, because reinforcements from other guilds were scheduled to crash in within a few days. Chamber thanked her for always thinking about them, then admitted the mission was brutal. But they couldn't just sit there and do nothing when something like this might strike again soon, and on top of that, he wanted to take care of that black goblin himself. With that said, they sprinted out of the guild, while Dingle and the rest shoved their hopes into the air and wished them luck for the mission. They raced back into the forest of Noi side by side, and they pushed farther into the unknown. They recoiled in terror when they stumbled on the mangled carcass of a severed cave bow. Ale spotted the magic stone still sitting there, untouched and not even scratched, so whoever did it must have struck just moments ago. Then he couldn't help but wonder who had the nerve to do that. But Chamber had already guessed the truth, and now he was dead certain that the Black Goblin was still lurking somewhere in this forest. They kept pushing ahead, and before they knew it, they were miles inside the woods, deep enough to feel the darkness closing in, where they'd never set foot before. Suddenly, Ale's blood ran cold. There right behind her loomed a giant spider, and it terrified her so hard her blood ran cold. But Chamber snapped into action and cut it clean in half in a flash. He leaned in and asked her, "Are you okay?" She was so terrified her words tangled up in her mouth, and she finally blurted out what that creature really was. He told her it was a paralyzed spider. But that wasn't the end. Another whole group came barreling in right on top of them, and she realized this wasn't random at all. It was their territory. It bolted out fast, and then Ale leaned in and asked him, did he feel something was off in this place too? She told them that ever since they stepped into this forest, monsters had been everywhere, but not a single goblin had shown up. Now that I think about it, he even realized, daylight or not, this place looked like a totally different forest. He finally admitted something was seriously wrong, but with no real choice left, they crept forward with bated breath. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the trees swallowed the path behind them. They were stunned to find a whole goblin settlement right there. It basically told us why no goblins ever showed up in the forest, because every single one had been dragged and gathered right here. But they weren't just relaxing, every one of them stayed on edge, quietly crouched inside their tents like they were ready to bolt. So they both chose to watch closely for a while. And with the sun already sinking, he pushed for a break. Then they took turns on night watch, keeping each other safe as darkness rolled in. Later that night, Ale stayed awake in the chamber, taking watch duty while the world finally quieted down. He shot his eyes up and realized the sky was surging brighter. Daylight was about to hit any second. But in the settlement, the goblins didn't change a bit. Then it hit him staring at this settlement was going nowhere, until out of nowhere. Then his eyes locked onto a black goblin creeping toward that area. A black goblin stalked right through that settlement like it owned the place. And Chamber finally snapped awake. This whole area was his turf after all. But then he spotted the other Gotland's reactions, and they were just as terrified, so he yanked Ale awake right away. She leaned in and asked what was wrong, and he hissed, "SHH, keep your voice down," before telling her that the black goblin had just shown up. The instant she spotted the black goblin strutting right there, her world went quiet. Cold shivers raced down her spine, and the thought hit her hard. He'd murdered Adelina and wiped out her entire party. Chamber could see it. She was trembling hard, fear gripping her to the bone. And blurted out, "Are you okay?" She told him she was fine with a calm voice, but inside her head she braced herself. She knew she couldn't fall apart. And he couldn't just keep it safe every single time. She couldn't help wondering if that black goblin ran the whole place like some kind of boss. And yeah, he could asterisk guess that was possible, but deep down he knew it wasn't that easy. Something was screaming wrong, and he couldn't ignore it. Just then, the black goblin tracked down a tiny goblin and pinned it in his sights, because he had been searching for one just like it. That was scrambling to stay out of his sight. And he murdered it for no reason at all, which left both of them utterly frozen. Then another goblin tried to slip away from behind him. He snatched it down too, and then the little goblins, every last one, followed right behind him. Witnessing it hit him like a punch, everything started sprinting away from him. They stood there together, completely lost, with zero clue what the hell was happening. Chamber finally understood why they hadn't spotted a single goblin earlier. The little monsters weren't gone at all. They'd been cowering in the woods, hiding from that terrifying thing. To the black goblin, kin didn't exist. Humans and monsters were nothing but prey to him. Ale also realized the goblins in Rumble City weren't just lurking. They were running from him too, and that's why they looked completely wrecked. The black goblin caused all this chaos, and they knew they had to take him down, no excuses. The monster started drifting away, and the two of them ditched their heavy gear and slipped after him in total silence. As they chased him straight into the woods, they couldn't figure out where he was headed, like exactly where. But then bam, out of nowhere, the goblin froze mid-step and snapped around, glaring at them with a terrifying, nightmare-bright stare. They suddenly realized the whole thing was already out in the open. Someone had spotted them. And he launched forward at them with ruthless speed, aiming to wipe them both out. But right away, Ale ripped into them with her light javelin strike, and blasted the monster back, crashing it into the trees. Chamber's eyes went wide the moment she realized how brutally strong her attack was. But she knew this was way too soon to celebrate, because the fight wasn't even close to ending. The black goblin yanked off his hood like, "All right, now I'm dead serious." As the two of them broke into a sprint, fleeing from him. He snapped into a chase right after them, and to Chambers' shock, he wasn't just running. He was actually closing the gap and catching up. Now that he leveled up, none of that fear or worry hit him. His speed shot through the roof, and he was dead sure the goblins wouldn't catch them that easily. They kept sprinting as fast as they could, dodging every step he took, until finally they slammed to a full stop and stood there, waiting for him to catch up. That black goblin sensed it too, something felt off asterisk, so it whipped its head around, searching for trouble. Then right out of nowhere, he crushed straight through a spider web. Turns out Chamber was luring him into the paralysis spider's territory, using it like a trap to freeze him dead in his tracks. And sure enough, it didn't touch him at all. Then, with one brutal swing of his sword, he tore through every web blocking his path, and the best part, Chamber barely even felt the slowdown. That tiny distraction was all he needed. Now he gripped his new sword and was ready to go toe-to-toe with him. He'd been grinding up to this exact moment, while Ale sharpened her rage, hungry for revenge, and with one last breath, he barreled toward the black goblin, determined to finish this once and for all. Adele fired a light arrow to bait him, and Chamber instantly surged forward, slammed into his space, and swung his sword to take him down. The goblin fumbled the block, and the attack smashed straight through. Chamber rubbed at his face, and it was starting. He was finally getting the hang of his sword. Now he could swing it like his old iron sword again, same heavy weight, plus that enchant light boost, and he could feel the power level jumping clean off the charts. His opponent stood frozen in front of him, and he couldn't quite decode what was going through his head, yet one thing was crystal clear. Rage was boiling inside him right now. A black goblin exploded forward, slamming into him and battering him with raw, unrelenting brute force. Chamber shoved him back and reminded him that black goblins didn't know the first thing about swordplay. They crushed their foes with raw strength and blistering speed. All he had to do was match his speed, stay right on his heels, and he could shut down every strike. Those hits weren't random either. They were feeding electricity into his sword, and the more it charged, the more terrifyingly powerful it became. Both of them kept throwing punches at each other, one attack after another. He slammed up a perfect defense, blocking every single attack like it never had a chance to land, until the Chamber finally seized control and shoved the black goblin back with nothing but raw strength. That raw power stunned Al too. Then he snapped back to reality because he knew he couldn't afford to drop his guard for even a second. The black goblin still lurked in the shadows, clinging to his secret technique. That green flame shattered his sword clean in half the last time they went to war. The black goblin finally snapped his blade to life, and green flames erupted across it. Chamber didn't flinch at all. He was certain this sword wouldn't snap like the last one. With that in his head, he launched forward at the monster, and before you could even, it nailed him right on the mark. He realized right in his own head that the fight was finally finished, as his sword finally bit down and he could feel it connect. As soon as he glanced back, the black goblin began reshaping its entire body right before his eyes. And the change didn't stop. It twisted everything into a completely new, horrifying form. Chamber snapped at Ale to get back as his mind raced. What the hell is going on? Did the dark god's influence slam into this place? He stared at the moment like, okay, what do I do now? When? Suddenly, right out of nowhere, the monster vanished from his eyes and it lunged straight at his face, slashing him with clawed strikes. He barely threw up his defenses in time, but he couldn't believe how wildly the black goblin had detonated into speed. Its speed and power skyrocketed into insane, unstoppable territory. Chamber fought to shove back every attack, but blast after blast kept forcing him farther and farther. He could feel it. This couldn't last. So he tried to put some space between them. Then the moment he could react, it was already too late. The black goblin loomed over him, claws poised to rip him apart on the spot. Right then, Ale snapped in and blasted her light javelin straight into the monster's face, saving him at the last second. That nerd caught the exact moment to finally breathe. But she shot him a warning, because the black goblin was back again and it was lunging to attack him. This time, the Chamber juked out of it. He backed off in a flash, and when the light javelin slammed him straight on, he froze, because it did absolutely nothing. But Ale shot back that it cost him. His face was already battered, bruises creeping over every inch. She didn't slow down, she kept charging at him, relentlessly spamming the light javelin again and again. The black goblin snapped out of every attack with insane speed and left every blade and spell scratching past him, untouched. Chamber couldn't even read his opponent's moves anymore. Like it was finally going full beast mode. With that chaos locked in, he decided to bare his real self and go full tank mode, ordering Ale to hunt for a crack in the armor while he drew the beast's attention. He lunged forward with his sword drawn, charging straight ahead while the black goblin darted out of his strike and snapped back with a deadly counter. It counterattacks with a slash from those claws. The Chamber slammed shut and blocked it, and Ale seized the moment, flinging another glowing light javelin straight at the monster. He charged forward and slashed the black goblin, and the moment steel kissed the air, it sprang back to dodge the killing strike. Suddenly he started to bleed and when they finally laid eyes on that chamber, motivation hit hard. Because if they kept pushing like this, they'd be able to end it. Chamber clocked it, no matter how messy its moves got, it was giving off emotion now, and that made its attacks way too easy to read. He and Ale can lock onto targets at any distance, right up close or way out at long range. And because they'd been leveling up side by side this whole time, it felt like they moved as one perfectly in sync. Believing the battle finally tilted their way, he launched into another sprint toward the monster, and they kept trading brutal hits while Ale unleashed her light javelin from far away. Even when it managed to block it, Chamber refused to let up and kept the pressure crushing down on it. And little by little he finally realized they were grinding it down piece by piece, right in front of his eyes. They just had to stay relentless, keep the heat on, and hold their ground from a safe distance. And he was sure it would all be over soon. Then, just like that, it snapped shut and slammed straight toward his face, attacking him on the spot. Barely in time, he snapped his guard up, right as she aimed to finish it with her light javelin. The black goblin spotted her and bolted straight behind the chamber, hiding there like it was using the wall as a shield. Just then she locked eyes with a black goblin, and the way it stared right back froze her solid, leaving her mind racing in stunned disbelief. If it was really locking its focus on her. The chamber kept slamming in attack after attack, and the second she finally got an opening, she hurled her light javelinica straight at the monster. It slammed the attack away with its arm, and the moment it did, it was obvious. It was already adapting to their every move. Chamber could feel Ale's magic sputtering out, and with every passing second, he had no clue how much longer they could keep this going. Even so, he could see it clearly. This whole mess was draining the black goblin's stamina fast. His sword's thunder roared at full power, and he poured every last ounce of himself into that final, earth-shaking strike. They both exploded forward, colliding mid-lunge like a spark about to ignite, ready to smash into battle. Then out of nowhere, the black goblin catapulted into the air, like a punch thrown straight at the moment, and slammed in behind him. It dropped dead center right in front of Ale, and she was the one who had the sights set right on the target now. And then up close, he finally sees the monsters with his own eyes. Panic hit her like a wave, and she launched her light javelin attack in a desperate bid to break through. But it was already too late, and before she could even catch on, a black goblin slashed into her with razor-sharp claws. Chamber shut her out like a trigger snapping, then she crumpled to the ground, name swallowed by the fall. And the monster snapped its focus back to him in an instant, and then charged in with everything he had. He slammed the path shut again, rage exploding through him. He surged forward and snapped back hard, aiming to plant a deadly do-or-die blow. In his head, he knew he had to move fast. This beast couldn't be ignored anymore. He kept the heat on the black goblin, driving the pressure higher and higher. Seeing Ale bleed out back there, he stared at the horror and couldn't look away. He shouted at her to hit the brakes and unleash her healing magic on herself, right now. But she already knew it. Her healing spell wouldn't stand a chance against a wound like that. Still, she shot her hand out and grabbed her wand. She thrust it skyward and a spark of hope hit, because she knew there was still one last thing she could do. She loosed a glowing light arrow straight into the sky. That snatched Chamber's attention clean out of nowhere. But he had no clue what she was up to. While his focus slipped, the monster surged ahead and took control. And then it raked the air to pieces with its claws. Chamber was furious. He snapped back with an attack, drove a clean hit, and hacked straight through its shoulder. The two of them froze for a beat, and just by looking at it, they knew. He could feel the energy draining fast, like the whole thing was about to hit empty. So this was it, time for him to go full throttle and unleash the all-out attack. He thrust his sword forward and unleashed every last drop of crackling electricity trapped inside it. And the black goblin slammed his claws down, blasting them with sickly green flames. In that split second, Chamber's eyes widened. He couldn't believe he still had a trump card hiding up his sleeves. But none of that mattered anymore. He just had to land the hit before it struck first. But before he could even raise his sword, the goblin lunged in, claws flashing, and cut him down. Blood blasted from his wounds, and he couldn't even process it. Again, he'd failed to protect anyone. With Ale on his mind, he blurted an apology. He'd promised her the world and still failed, then, just like that. He caught the exact tone of that voice. Every last drop of his HP and MP came roaring back to full. And just as he started to heal, he had zero clue what the heck was happening. At that exact moment, he spotted a dead, paralyzed spider tumbling down from above. And it hit him hard like, wait, what just happened? Cut to a flashback, back when they were trapped in the paralyzed spider's forest. Ale's divine message skill suddenly lit up, and she blurted out exactly how many experience points they needed for the next level, plus the fact that both of them were already sitting at level 30. Meanwhile, Chamber stared at the numbers, calculating how many monsters they'd have to slaughter to level up. Hale pushed them to hold onto what they'd learned as tightly as possible, because if If everything goes sideways, their level up will bail them out with full HP and MP recovery. So they'd keep it hidden as their ace card for any emergency. He also said you can't farm experience without punching monsters, so they had to hunt somewhere they could spot tiny ones at a glance, no random interruptions. Ale pointed them to this spot by the paralyzed spider's nest, and once he heard it, he immediately agreed, like that was exactly where the plan had to happen. Now back in the present, while his battered body fought to heal, he replayed her words in his head, because even in a moment like this, she still remembered the plan. He shot back to his feet. He yanked his sword free and charged the black goblin full force. Blood blasted from its body as it got absolutely wrecked. But it only poured fuel on the fury, and it lunged at him like a wild beast, while Chamber slipped through every single hit, one dodge at a time. He even mocked it, laughing that those pathetic attempts wouldn't land on him anymore. And the goblin lunged at him again, desperate to land another attack. A light javelin slammed into it from behind, like a bolt out of nowhere. Ale was up and moving again, fully healed and stronger than ever. And Chamber lit up the moment he saw her. Right when the monster started to turn its focus toward her. The Chamber launched into an attack. He barely managed to block it, but the fight didn't stop, He wouldn't let up, he kept driving the pressure, and then he sliced it clean from the side. He admitted it was brutal to keep pushing forward when it still wouldn't go down yet. As he and Ale stood shoulder to shoulder, they finally decided it was time to end this for good, once and for all. Both of them surged forward, unleashing attacks charged to the max. And the black goblin came rocketing in, claws out and ready to tear through them. Side by side, they unleash a storm of attacks, and smashed it with a dead-on strike, triggering a massive explosion that rocks everything. When the dust finally cleared, the monster was wiped clean off the map. And just like that, they finally wiped out the black goblin for good. The two of them stood there, shocked out of their minds, still unable to accept that they'd actually pulled it off. But before they even got the chance to celebrate, everything hit a wall. They threw their guard back up, because they were completely boxed in by a roaring horde of goblins. There were tons of them and the two of them huddled up, trading thoughts nonstop. Killing that black goblin felt like a huge win, but Chamber didn't even blink. And he didn't care how many goblins swarmed him. He'd crush every last one because he'd just leveled up. Then out of nowhere, the ground started trembling under their feet. And the entire forest was trembling like it might snap in half. They shot their eyes up, and their jaws dropped in total disbelief, spotting a colossal monster looming over them, glaring down like it owned the sky. Right as it closed in on them, a goblin finally stepped into view. It wasn't some run-of-the-mill goblin at all. It was the king goblin right there, looming like a nightmare. They stared in disbelief as the settlement's own boss stepped right in front of them. And it lunged to crush them under its weight. They scrambled out of the way so fast they barely had time to breathe. One stomp and the damage was instant, brutal, undeniable. The second they realized how bad it was, they knew, if that hit them, it was game over. The king goblin lunged to snatch them, and Chamber immediately shoved Ale back to shield her. She reached for him, then boom, they grabbed him instead. He was trapped in its grip with zero way to break free. And he could feel it. If this kept going, there'd be no way back and his life would be over. He was about to lose hope, then out of nowhere a voice promised, "Don't worry, we'll handle the rest." In a single heartbeat, the king's head was severed from his body, and the Chamber slammed down hard onto the ground. He stared in disbelief. Turns out the very person who saved him and wiped out the king goblin was none other than Jane. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Jane just apologized for making him wait, like that was supposed to be enough. Ale burst forward, demanded to know if he was all right, and then offered to heal him on the spot. Then Jane strides right up to him and then cast the extra heal spell on him. Bam, his wounds vanish instantly, fully healed in the blink of an eye. Ale's jaw dropped when she realized the person standing in front of her was casting a top-tier healing spell. They grilled him, demanding to know who he really was, because not only could he pull off the extra heal spell, he also flattened the king goblin with a single brutal strike. Before Jane could even get a word out, a lady shouted that there were still low-level monsters lurking all around them. Her name was Dragwell, and just saying it sent a chill down your spine. And Jane told the two of them, "Go rest for a bit, I'll handle the rest of these monsters." That little moment totally irritated Chamber, like, who does he think he is with all that high-end mighty swagger? And now you're dying to see what he's about to do next. Right then, it clicked. Nyako must have meant it when she said backup was already on the way. He could already tell Jane had changed a ton since the last time he saw him, but he couldn't wait to find out just how much. Jane and Drywell strode straight up to the goblins and planted themselves right in the middle. Right when the monsters were about to tear into them, he snapped his hand forward and unleashed a chain lightning spell. With a sharp snap of his fingers, with one sickening snap of his finger, he blasted every goblin charging him with lightning, and they were fried into nothing in the blink of an eye. The ones left behind panicked, but that dry well wasn't letting anyone slip away. She hurled a tiny bomb right after the ones fleeing, watching it chase their escape. But a few goblins still slipped through, and they came barreling at Jane, snapping into attack. But with one violent swing of her sword, Jane wiped every last one of them out in a single breath, like it was nothing at all. He sheathed his sword, then smoothly fixed his hair like he was ready for whatever came next. I begged for it, and then I apologized to Chamber all over again for making him wait. While he and Ale just stood there locked on him like, "Wait, are you for real?" Chamber laid out the truth, that this was their real destination, and she snapped back instantly, saying there was absolutely no way that could be true. Soon they piled into a tavern together, and Jane brought it up, saying it had been ages since he'd last sat down to drink with him. They used to go wild with drinking contests, and Chamber still couldn't shake the memory. No matter what he did, he never once managed to beat them. Talking about the old days, he asked what the deal was with Martha and Naoru these days, while quietly admitting to himself he really didn't want to run into them again. Jane told him they'd split up the moment he left too, and yeah, deep down, he couldn't disagree with that, because he never really felt like he belonged with them. Meanwhile, Drywell kept ordering round after round, not even close to done. Chamber nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw her personality, and Jane leaned in and told him the truth. He wasn't just meeting her, he was teaming up with her as the new Dawn. Chamber told him he somehow snagged a seriously unique guest for his party, and the moment he said that, Jane leaned in and revealed she's the Dragon Priestess, the one who guards the Holy Sword. He didn't stop for a second. He kept pushing forward, telling him that the moment he drew the Holy Sword, she recognized him as the new wielder. While Chamber just went blank because all these sudden twists hit his brain like a wrecking ball and he couldn't keep up. Hearing all that, he snapped. Right up to this moment he'd been feeling unstoppable, but now compared to Jane's stories, he was nothing more than a goblin hunter. But then Jane grabbed his attention and swore up and down that none of it was true. He could tell he'd leveled up for real. He cut down the Forest-Blessed one and then buried a Gotland swordsman too, and those wins were absolutely unreal. But yeah, all that praise made him shy as hell. But right after the words left his mouth, he snapped and asked Jane if that black goblin was really just a goblin swordsman powered by the evil god's blessings, and Jane confirmed it. Chamber finally realized that had to be the reason he couldn't level up. He crushed something brutal and still got 0 experience points, not even 1, so he pushed that thought aside. Jane made it clear his growth wasn't only about brute strength. He finally got it when they reported the whole incident to the Rumble Guild and he saw how everyone absolutely adored him. He knew he'd struck gold. He'd turned into the one person everybody suddenly couldn't live without. After he showered Chamber with praise, embarrassment started to creep over him. Because if that asterisk man was saying it, then Chamber had to have really grown. While Jane leaned in and told him he needed to trust himself more. Then he slammed his cup down and told him straight up that he had something he needed to discuss. Chamber couldn't stop asking what was going on when Ailes. They crept up on him from behind and ripped the soul straight out of his body with a jump scare. Turns out she couldn't handle her drink again, and boom, she slipped right back into her full drinking state. He barked at her to stop, but she brushed it off and kept insisting he should come have a drink with her. He glanced at Jane, stared at him, and asked what he was about to say, but then he just grinned at the sight of them both and waved it off. It's nothing. He swore he'd grind twice as hard to measure up, but Chamber didn't buy it for a second. He leaned in and demanded to know if the guy was seriously mocking him or just playing games. Jokes aside, he swore he'd never back down, and one day he'd stand shoulder to shoulder with him. On that note, the two of them erupted in cheers, celebrating just how far they'd grown. The next day hit, and his head was still in full-on hangover chaos. And when it was over, Sir Enmi could tell he'd had a rough night, so he blurted out a quick apology and the manager waved him off like, "Don't worry, pal, we're the heroes who saved Rumble City, that's all that matters." Chamber shook his head at taking all the credit and insisted that, in the end, it was Jane who finally brought down the King Goblin. Still, certainly, the guild praised his and Ailes' achievements just as much. But then he cut straight through the noise and demanded to know whether they were. They couldn't wait to tear out of this town, leaving them both completely baffled. He told them that Dingle was already hammering out their letter of introduction, to hand straight to the Boldo Guild. Boldo towered over Rumble, packed with nastier monsters lurking nearby. Yet Boldo was so sure they'd wipe that threat out for good. He could already feel it, Rumble's monsters were getting too puny for them now. So he shot them the question again, wanna ditch this city and climb up to the next level. After what felt like forever, the two finally crashed up to the gates of Boldo City. And right there, it looked like there were two. The guard grilled them, asking if they were adventurers, and Chamber simply flashed the card he'd gotten from Dingle. So legit the guard's eyes lit up, and he waved them straight into the city. The moment they stepped into the city, both of them froze, because it looked nothing like Rumble. The whole place felt massive, and the streets were packed with people, like the city couldn't breathe without them. Not only were there tons of foods he'd never even laid eyes on before, but every single bite left him reeling with pure, jaw-dropping amazement. He just knew this city was finally about to hand him fresh, brand-new experiences, all because Serenity had pointed the way. They also heard the whole town was split in two noble lives on the east side, while the commoners were shut off behind a towering wall. Ale told the chamber guests that the best shops had to be on the east side, and that all kinds of talented craftsmen were sure to be gathering there. He nodded along with her, already thinking, if we're hunting gear, then we hit the east side right now. But then Ale fired off a sharp question. Why did he come here, and what exactly was his reason? She felt it deep in her bones. He clearly wanted to ditch everything and go with Jane. He confessed that at first teaming up with him crossed his mind, but then he remembered how that always goes. You start just helping, and before you know it, you're depending on him like you did back in the old days. He wanted to grow with her, step by step at their own pace, and honestly that made her feel relieved to hear it, so they pushed straight for the guild first. The second they crossed into the Adventurers Guild, everything changed. Two stunning young ladies stepped in and welcomed them with smiles that lit up the whole room. Chambers stared at them, absolutely stunned, like they'd pulled him into a spell, while Ailes coughed hard, snapping him back into reality. Nervous panic hit him hard, and he fumbled through trying to introduce himself. And then this lady leaned in and demanded he follow her, because word about him, straight from Dingle, had already reached her. Because he was stuck as a lowly C-rank adventurer. She'd already cooked up 2 quests just waiting for him. But before he agreed, she leaned in and warned him. These 2 quests weren't just missions, they were the key to a threat Boulder was dealing with right now. Hearing that stunned him, and he blurted out, "Is it that important?" Then pushed the real question, "So why are you handing something like this to a total newbie like me?" She just shrugged and said Dingle told her the 2 of them wouldn't die, no matter how reckless the quests got. Then, right at that moment, he snapped and started cursing the old man, his head exploding with rage. Still, he dove into the quest list, and it hit hard. An assault on trait caravans, a shadowy monster hiding in the northern boulder, and a kidnapping case pinned on wyverns. He remembered how terrifying wyverns could be, absolute monsters in a fight. And it sent a jolt of unease through both of them, but they snapped out of it fast, reminding each other that they'd grown a ton. And this was the perfect moment to put their skills to the test, so they accepted the quest without wasting a second. Later, they finally reached the scene where the merchant convoy got wiped out, and he realized the monster-repelling road itself had been smashed too. He then shot Ayla a glance. She looked confused and just a little stifled. He asked what was on her mind, and she snapped back that she'd been sure they'd end up facing the wyverns. The best excuse he could scrape together was this: he'd fought before taking on a wyvern, so they should warm up first. Serenui already warned them this city was way tougher than the one back in Rumble. Ale leaned in and teased him like, "So you're really scared of the monsters lurking all over this city?" But he wouldn't back down. He kept insisting they had to take action first, no excuses. Right then, from that wrecked cart sitting on the roadside, strange animal noises started to crawl out. He couldn't stop thinking, was this cart sent with the convoy that got hit? And when he peered inside to pinpoint what was making that noise, a round little ball of doom rolled out of nowhere and smacked him straight in the face. It turned out to be a sheep-like creature, and Chamber fumed over getting nailed in the face. But Ale, of course, couldn't help finding it totally adorable. She was completely smitten, and she couldn't stop herself from wanting to reach out and pet it. But then her instinct screamed something was seriously off with it. Chamber snapped at her, "Even if it looks adorable, it's still a monster, don't get fooled." But she still marched right up to it, because that poor thing looked seriously injured. She clutched her hurt and rushed to soothe the creature, whispering that everything would be okay. Then out of nowhere she felt it, snapped her wand out instantly. She heard a sharp rustle whispering out of the bushes, like something was about to jump out. And Chambers stepped up in front of her, ready to square off with whatever was coming next. But then boom, huge sheep-like monsters closed in and surrounded them. He couldn't help wondering, were those the little one's buddies, or were they hiding some bigger reason? To everyone's shock, the monsters started kicking it like it was a ball made for them to play. I couldn't stand it, so I snapped at them, asking why they were hurting my chan like that. But all Chamber couldn't stop wondering, what kind of name was that supposed to be? The monsters' focus snapped straight to them, and he figured these were the very same monsters that were tearing into the caravan. They charged straight at the 2 of them, then Chamber snapped into action and took the lead. And seeing it charge in that reckless way, he slammed in. He slammed the monster back with a brutal strike that rocked it hard. It shot backward and bonked every other one in the row like a ping-pong ball ricocheting down the line. Chamber couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, because the shock from that attack hit different, wrong in a way he couldn't ignore. Ale couldn't believe it. He praised him for wiping them all out with one single strike. But he couldn't be sure of that because suddenly, he stared at the monsters ahead and realized something was going horribly wrong with them. It finally tore loose, and what burst out from inside left both of them reeling. A bull-like monster was right there, looming over everything. And then Chamber suddenly realized those fluffy furs must have swallowed his attack earlier. They'd all lost their fur and he couldn't help wondering, was this really what they looked like underneath? Then he started to worry, was that fur armor protecting them gone for good? If it was, could they really only survive one hit now? He couldn't stand the uncertainty, so he ordered Ale to pummel them from range and test it out. She hurled a glowing javelin straight into one of them, and that monster crumpled in an instant. His theory hit the nail on the head, and once he knew that, fear simply couldn't touch him. He didn't fear them anymore. He started slicing through those monsters, one after another. Now that he finally figured out how to fight them, they didn't seem scary at all anymore. And the two of them mowed them all down like it was nothing, not even a hint of effort. Then they checked the cart, found no trace of the caravan, and concluded they'd slipped back into the city. He even urged them to haul back to Boulder City, but that tiny monster was still there, sobbing in agony. Ale bolted forward and used her magic to heal it on the spot. Magic crackled in the air and Chamber once again snapped a warning. Something terrible was still lurking out there. She finally admitted he was right, but guilt crushed her, watching it get attacked by its own kind again and again, just because its color and looks didn't match theirs, like it had been bullied for far too long. And she finally understood that crushing feeling of being sidelined by everyone around her. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she begged them to keep this one locked up inside themselves. When he caught the look in her eyes, he was completely lost for words, like his brain just froze. He remembered there were adventurers who could sick monsters in their battles, but only the beast master skill could do it, and neither of them had that power. As soon as the little one got healed and stood back up, it stared at him with those glowing bright eyes, and the system instantly tagged it as a one-of-a-kind specimen. Gave him a real choice, whether he wanted it riding shotgun with him as his companion. He went speechless at the message, while the sheep kept locking eyes with him, those sparkling gazes refusing to break as it eagerly waited for his next move. He couldn't believe it. There was no way a normal guy like him could pull off something like this without the monster tamer skill in the first place. But he also knew better than anyone. At this point, expecting common sense from his level-up skill was just plain pointless. He couldn't stop thinking about whether he should really trust a monster as his ally. But then he noticed the sheep staring right back at him, smiling so bright it felt unreal. And while Ale was at it too, she was doing the exact same thing. So he threw in the towel and finally caved, agreeing to take it in. He slammed the confirm button, and just like that, the unique angry sheep was officially in his party. Ale practically exploded with joy. When the system kept insisting it was a unique species, Ale's mind started racing. Was this something new or just another blessing from the dark god, since this was the first time he'd ever heard of it? Then the system demanded a name, and Ale was so determined that he went straight for it. He wouldn't stop until he called it My-chan ***. So he didn't argue with her at all. He just nodded, confirmed the name, and called it next. Then he snapped open the stats window. And the monster's stats were seriously off the charts. Even though it was only a level 1, its HP was higher than Nail's. And that blew his mind, because now he was convinced this monster could tank like a brick wall. But for now he strode up to her, grabbed her hand, and greeted her with a firm shake, right as. Which had me grinning like an idiot, genuinely thrilled too. With that decision made, they turned right around and booked it back to the guild. Later, he spilled every detail to the guild's receptionist, how a swarm of furious sheep mauled the merchant caravan. She clocked what was made at his side and leaned in, asking if that little monster was tagging along with him now, but then panic hit him hard, because he had absolutely no idea how to explain to her why he was hauling a monster around. Before he could get a word out, she lined in and demanded to know, was he a monster tamer too? With zero other excuses left, he nodded, that's exactly it, and the moment he agreed, she slipped a ring into his hand. That tainting ring, the one that proves the monster's tamed, and Ale couldn't help but squeal at how adorable Mai looked wearing it. Then she demanded the ring fee and he immediately assumed, of course she's charging me for that too. Alright, then he broke away from the guild, and as they hit the street he pushed the idea, let's head back to the inn for now. Ale couldn't stop thinking, could they really slip back to their usual routine now that Mai was in the party too? And he figured they'd be okay once they had the taming ring. Worst case, if it didn't work, they could still hustle it to find another spot because this was a massive city. And so, after getting slammed with rejection after rejection from a whole bunch of places, at last an old man finally stepped up and accepted them. Even though his place looked pretty shabby and it made both of them feel uneasy, they still got to stay there. So at least for now it was something. They stayed there through the night, and when morning hit, it was time for me to train. Then they spotted a wild deer roaming the fields. He was convinced that would make the perfect opponent to prove May's skill, then leaned in and asked, "You ready?" Then she started shaking her head, eyes wide with fear as the deer stared back. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Why was she shaking in fear when wild deer were supposed to be weaker than those furious sheep? He leaned in and asked, "Doesn't it embarrass you to be terrified of someone weaker?" And then he shoved the urgency in her face, demanding she get moving. But just as he was about to do it, she slipped by accident and started rolling straight downhill, charging straight into the wild where the deer were waiting. The deer panicked, swore she was about to be attacked, and then lashed out first. He snaps her up in the air, tossing her like a ball. Chamber and Ale locked in. This was the moment they had to jump in, right when they were seconds away from unleashing their attack. He clocked me plummeting from the sky like a meteor straight at him. And when she hit the ground, it was so brutal the dust exploded everywhere. When the smoke finally cleared, she landed right on top of that wild deer, knocked it down instantly, and didn't even realize what she'd just done. Both of them froze when they saw it. One moment that wild deer lay down and the other moment May stood there, perfectly calm, like nothing at all had just happened. He couldn't believe she just shrugged off a wild deer's full-on attack, and then she pulled off the win by pure luck. Those tank skills of hers were seriously unreal. And that only proved Chambers' instincts were dead on. She could turn into a walking nightmare of a tank, and all they needed now was to spark her fighting spirit. So they pressed on to the next enemy. Hale's nerves spiked, and he blurted out, asking if Mike really could take this one solo. And he told her she had to take it on alone, so she'd finally grow her confidence from the ground up. And yeah, her opponent was only a slime, the so-called king of the weakest monsters. He wanted to forge her confidence through wins, so he threw her straight at the weakest monster of all time. Scared out of her wits, she first reached out, froze at what happened, and then couldn't resist poking it again and again. And even Chamber couldn't figure out what the hell she was even trying to pull off. Then the slime snapped like it had just lost all patience. It lunged at her, crashing in like a beast, and that freaked both him and Ale out because her safety was suddenly on the line. And once again, she just stood there like the whole disaster never even happened. Chamber stared in pure shock as she nailed a full-body slam and didn't even blink, like it was nothing, even though it was just a slime. And now that it latched onto her, she ripped into a frantic spin and hurled it off her like it was nothing. She barreled forward and slammed into the slime head-on, taking it down in a single collision. He slammed it down and watched it splatter across the rock. Finally, she cracked into laughter, and for the first time, her confidence came roaring out with it. Chamber couldn't shake the thought that maybe she'd been bullying the weaker people all along. After she finally found her confidence, her growth shot up fast too. She charged straight into a swarm of monsters, but leveling up demanded way more EXP than it did for the two of them. Her boost and skills were absolutely unreal. Stack that insane HP with her damage reduction ability, and she started turning into a legit full-on tank. Later, once they finally rolled back into the city, even the guards lit up when they saw her. He leaned in, asked how she was doing, and slid her an offer for a. She hands them a cucumber as a little treat, and their faces light up like she just dropped a treasure because they absolutely adored her. Even so, she wasn't the only one. Surprisingly, almost the whole town had fallen for her, and they spoiled her with every kind of treat they could find. She'd blown up into a straight-up celebrity in Bluto. And the reason was simple. Every tame monster Mies put on display looked straight-up savage, all sharp edges and intimidating snarls, which made her cute, friendly face pop even harder. That's why folks loved her. Every time they hit the city, getting back to the inn turned into a full-on ordeal. But because of her, he still cut their food costs. So yeah, at least there's that. Much later that night, they slipped into a lively tavern. And Ale was over the moon to see their party finally clicking into place. Everything was falling together perfectly, and Chamber was just as thrilled because Maya wasn't just surviving anymore. She was holding her own and turning into exactly what he'd pictured. Now that they were finally ready, he decided the time was right. He was taking that quest and going to smash the Stumweaverns. Meanwhile, deep in Bluto's southwest mountains, a storm raged outside, while inside a cave everything was waiting. Dozens of tiny creatures scattered and fled from whatever was coming for them. Turns out that cave wasn't empty, it had a dragon lurking inside. A mysterious hooded man crept up to it, like trouble with a shadow. The dragon snapped and blasted him with a roaring burst of fire breath. But the man dodged it like it was nothing. And when he hit, he landed right on top of its head. He drove the blade into its face and dropped the dragon in a single heartbeat. As the dragon crumpled to the ground dead, suddenly bright light flooded back into its eyes, and it jolted awake again. The story snaps right back into the chamber, where the ale is poured and the tension hangs in the air. And they kept tearing through the hunt, chasing the elusive Weaver to the very end. She clocked it. Mai's energy was crashing fast. Now that I think about it, they hadn't had a real break in ages, and I couldn't help wondering if Yastel was okay. She assured him she was totally fine. Turns out leveling up her stamina boosted her endurance way more than she expected. That's when it hit him, was Maya burning out because her level was so low, so he pitched the brutal fix, shove her into leveling up and scare Ale into going along with it. But yeah, he was just messing around, and they all agreed to pull over right there for a quick break. She clocked the lost look on his face and asked, "What's running through your head?" And then he pointed out how weird it felt that, on this road, they'd barely seen any monsters at all. Now that he said it, she felt it too. This quiet hit just like the stillness they felt back in the forest of Noi, but he told her to shake it off, and they finally crashed and rested for a bit. When they finally got the signal to leave, they were ready to move out. But right then, Chamber caught a thunderous cry ripping out of the mountains. A strange roar rolled down from the mountaintop, and they couldn't help but wonder, was it a wyvern? It sounded brutally painful, like a broken sob ripping out of someone's chest. And he could tell something wild had to be going on. So the three of them huddled up, then followed it like their lives depended on it, ready to find out what was going on. As they press onward, up in the mountains, they suddenly ran into a panther. Leo's eyes locked on it like danger had a name. Chamber couldn't wrap his head around it. Why was a panther like Leo even there, when everyone said those monsters in the mountain area were supposed to be low-ranked? Up until this moment, that place had been completely monster-free. Then, out of nowhere, a C-rank monster stood right in front of him, and he froze in pure shock. But then he stepped up, like the moment demanded it. And she was braced to go to war with Panther Leo. He couldn't help but feel proud as she charged straight into the front lines alone. And he hauled her up from behind too. She rocketed forward, while Leo the Panther spun around, ready to strike at her from the back. She lunged back, and before he could land a hit, she smashed first, slamming him straight into the wall. He stared in awe, blown away by how viciously that slam hit. And he and Ale kept charging in, backing her up step after step. When the dust finally settled, he leaned in and praised me for the sheer bravery I showed in the fight. He stared at her and thought, that damage reduction skill is unreal. She's actually holding up even against the Panther Leo's claws. And he was convinced she'd become a key member of his party until suddenly he caught the level-up voice roaring in his head. He leveled up, and right then he unlocked the party enhancement ability. It was brand new, and he had zero clue what it even did. But then a screen blasted open in front of them and demanded he pick which member to power up for the party. He had no clue what it would do, so he threw himself into the chaos, picked his own name as the test subject. Suddenly a blinding flash erupted, and bright light wrapped all around him. This light hit him like something was waking up inside him and compared to the boost he gets when he levels up, this one felt even wilder, like his whole body had suddenly turned weightless. Right then, a monster lunged up behind him, and he grinned, because this was the perfect chance to test drive his brand new ability. He taunted the monster to charge straight at him. Then it lunged at him, stabbing forward with its needle-sharp hands. He dodged every single one of them without breaking a sweat, because he'd gotten so light now, and you could feel his powers pumping through his body too. The monster shot upward into the sky, and he couldn't stop thinking, what if he tried flying too now that his body felt this light? And suddenly, as he stepped face to face with the monster, he realized he could. He launched it into the air and cleaved it in half, cutting the whole thing short for good. After that, he couldn't resist. He fired up that brand new feature on Ale 2. The moment he picked her name, her whole body erupted in a sickly green glow, and she instantly felt power ripping through her veins. Then another monster was already waiting right there for her to smash and prove her new abilities. And right as she hurled that light javelin straight at it, its power had shot through the roof too, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She watched it slam the monster with one clean hit, then explode the moment it touched. Chamber slowly realized this feature was basically handing them a massive power boost, and he couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he used it on me too. Right then, Ale spotted something downright weird unfolding on the mountain peak, like it wasn't just wyverns up there. And his gut screamed that it better not be worse, but deep down he knew they had to be ready, because if another brutal showdown hit, it could look just like that terrifying fight with the black goblins. Ale could feel worry creeping in second by second. And once he saw it, he leaned in and promised her, this party could take down a wyvern, even if everything went sideways and danger surged. Because they could always fall back to the city, and Ale agreed, so they set out for the summit the very next morning. The very next day, all three of them clawed their way up the mountain, and right on the edge of the summit, they could almost feel it. They stumbled into yet another Panther Leo blocking their path. But when he leaned in for a closer look, his blood went cold. This one was nothing like the one he'd faced before because it had two heads. He went all in even though he wanted to save his strength for the wyvern, because he knew with absolute certainty this wasn't a monster he could afford to hold back against. Ale poured light magic into his sword, and it blazed with power. And he barreled straight toward the two-headed panther. But right when he was about to move, everything flipped suddenly. Something lunged and snapped onto the panther, and ripped it free in an instant. A black wyvern erupted out of nowhere, right in front of them. They'd never once even heard of a pitch-black wyvern and he figured it might be a special situation, same kind as mine. But still, a chilling thought hit him. Was it like that black goblin cursed and blessed by an evil god? Hale didn't even want to entertain that thought, but deep down it was absolutely on the table, and the truth hit hard. The monster in front of them was nothing like anything normal. So they clenched their teeth, dug deep, and fought with everything they had. The wyvern surged into the sky, and right as it was about to strike it toasted them with a blast of fire breath. Ale leaned in and demanded Chamber hook her up with the party boost. The wyvern snapped its fire breath straight down on them. Blazing flames swallowed the whole area, and then, just as suddenly, it finally stopped. She saved them by snapping a magical shield into place around all of them. Chamber was stunned. She couldn't believe it actually worked, because magical barriers usually can't survive that level of damage, and then it only worked because that party boost technique supercharged everything. Now it was time for them to strike back. And she whipped out a glowing javelin and hurled it straight at the thing. He blasted the wyvern with a perfect direct hit even while it was soaring high in the air. The javelin rammed straight through one of its wings. But it still wouldn't go down fast. It just kept failing, stumbling lower and lower, hovering inches above the ground as it finally lost the power to stay airborne. Chamber's eyes snapped to May. He got the spark of an idea and begged her to help him out. He hit her with the party boost right away, turning her physical damage reduction skill up to maximum power. Then he hurled himself forward and started whipping his sword through the air, building up crackling lightning as he went. He sprang into the air, ready to slam her with a fully charged sword, because that magic barrier gave her serious resistance to lightning. Then he whipped his sword through the air, smacked a home run, and blasted her through the air like she was just another bouncing ball. He called this attack light in the middle of a cannonball, and it slammed into the wavering target straight in the face, dropping it hard onto the ground. Hale snapped him up, grilling him hard. Was he really taking those half-joking ideas she tossed out while they were drinking seriously? And he grinned and said, "Yeah, this is a brilliant idea," then admitted he'd been secretly training that move with Mai for ages. But even so, the fight wasn't even close to done, so he dug in and kept hammering that monster with relentless pressure. He barreled straight toward it, and the monster lunged at him with teeth bared. He snapped out of the way and surged straight toward it. He rammed his blade into its already mangled wing and tore it apart in one brutal slice, sealing it so it could never take flight again. Then the black wyvern started to shift, and strange, wild patterns erupted across its entire body. The chamber went wide-eyed as those eerie green patterns crawled across its body. And he finally understood. This monster was exactly like the black goblin he'd battled back when. Have the patterns looked exactly like the goblin stuff he'd seen before. But right now, none of that mattered, blessing or not, so he burst into the air and struck to finish it on the spot. Even when he finally connected dead-on, his sword just skittered off like it couldn't scratch them at all. And his entire body went rigid with shock. Wavering's body was stiffening up fast, and he couldn't stop thinking, what would he do next? The monster whipped its tail at him, ready to strike. But right then, Mie exploded into action and threw herself between them to shield him, because he couldn't stand the thought of her getting hurt. And he yanked her out of the danger at the last second, only to get slammed and hurt himself in the chaos. At least the two of them were still breathing. And Ale sprinted straight to him, tearing into the rescue with a healing burst. He thanked her for worrying about him, then snapped that it was pointless, because the wyvern's tail was packed with poison. Her healing couldn't undo the poison already crawling through his body, so he had to slam it down fast before it spread everywhere. And Hale had no clue how they'd even break through that monster's brutal, hard scale, but they had to try. But Chamber had cooked up a plan and pulled me in like, "Come with me." He told Ale to back them up from afar as the two of them sprinted straight at the black wyvern. This was their last burning shot to end everything. As it swung again and again, he burst aside, slipping past strike after strike. The monster revved up its fire breath and came roaring at him to end him. Ale cut him off on the spot and launched a glowing javelin straight into his face. The poison was already crushing his control, dizziness surged, and he knew he had to rush now while he still had time. But he had no way to pull it off by himself, and he straight up begged May to fire him off into the sky. She shoved him using her cushion-like fur, and it launched him upward into the air, straight into the sky. He finally locked eyes on the exact spot he'd been hunting for. There was a nasty wound on its head, and even with its whole body turned rock hard, he knew that spot had to be the one place it could break. So he ripped every last ounce of power from his sword and unleashed it all at once, and drove the blade straight into its head. The black wyvern was totally obliterated to ashes, and he finally crushed it for good. But for Chamber, it was already over. The poison had burrowed through his whole body. Then boom, a message hit them. All three had leveled up and they were totally restored, fully healed and ready to go. Worried to the bone, Ale shouted, "Hey, are you okay?" Then he snapped back on his feet like it never touched him, flashed a thumbs up, and told them the poison was finally gone. They were thrilled when they saw how much loot they'd bagged, so he pushed to sell every last bit. Black wyverns were rare as gold. And Ale shot back that there was no way they could haul it all, which he fully agreed with. So he turned around and raced back to town, praying the monsters had finally thinned out. But then, out of nowhere, he felt the cloaked stranger's presence closing in like a shadow. And it hit him so hard, chills raced straight down his spine. He tried to crack what was haunting him so hard, then his mind raced back to the same chilling idea. Was it, once again, someone blessed by the evil god? No time to dwell, he roared at everyone to keep their guard up, and before he could even process it, the hunter shoved him during the chase with his bare hands. The man couldn't believe it, just that, and it was already over for him while Ale froze in horror as Chambers' blood exploded across the room.